Some of them you've heard of: ammonium phosphate hydroxide nitrate. Okay, remember, in parentheses, it's not how many, it's the charge of the transition metal. This is probably one of the most important concepts that will last you through the semester and beyond in chemistry. So take some good notes. How do you name ions? Let's name the ions first, and then we'll get to the compounds. Well, generally, cations, which are formed from metals, have the same name as the atom. Sodium atom, sodium ion. Easy. Anions, typically we will keep the root of the name, drop the ending, and finish it with "ide." So oxygen becomes oxide, chlorine becomes chloride. So you will see a list of them in your textbook, and you just need to practice their names. Then there are things called polyatomic ions. Poly means many, and then atoms, many atoms together that are bonded together that form an ion as a group. And that group typically will stick together and function, and it has a charge. So there are lists of them, and you will see there are many. Some of them you need to begin to memorize their names and their charges, and some of them you've heard of: ammonium phosphate hydroxide nitrate. So keep that list handy, and it will help you memorize them and identify them when you see compounds. So here it is. How do you name a compound? Well, just like a person: first name, last name. We're going to name these things by the name of the cation, and then the second part, the name of the anion. So all you have to do is identify what's the cation and what's the anion. Let's talk about these formulas. So these are ionic compounds. The cation is always written first, and then there are subscripts, and I'll just describe what that means to you. I'll give you that bottom subscript right there. That last compound, that means there's 3 magnesiums, and then that subscript, sub means below, script means written, so numbers written below. That subscript means 2 of everything in that parentheses. So 2 of that phosphate polyatomic ion. The compound above, 1 magnesium, 2 chlorides. The one above would be 1 potassium, 1 fluoride. All right, so these are what ionic compounds look like in formulas, and we'll learn to write those in the future videos. So let's name these. Well, first of all, I've got to identify the ions. I recognize potassium makes the K plus ion, and then fluorine makes a fluoride ion, F minus. So it's very simple. Name the cation, and then name the anion, potassium fluoride. Okay, sometimes I like to draw between them, right, just so that I can well, magnesium, it's a metal, it makes that ion. His name is magnesium. And then Cl, that makes is chloride, so magnesium chloride. Notice that I did not tell how many chlorides are in the formula. You don't. You just name the 2 ions involved: cation, anion. All right, let's break this last one apart. It's still the magnesium ion. So we'll call that magnesium. And then what's the back end? This little guy is one of our polyatomics. Check your list. His name is phosphate. It's that simple. All you need to do is name the cation and then the anion. The good thing is the cation's written first. But do you notice that we don't see any charges in these formulas? Hang on to that thought. Maybe write that down. In the compound, there are no charges. The total charge of this thing is 0. And I'll explain that later. Now, let's get to transition metals. We have kind of skipped over that little D block. Remember the D block here? That's where our transition metals are. Now, these metals can form ions with different charges. For example, iron makes a +2 and a +3 charge. So the way we deal with transition metals only is write the charge in parentheses in Roman numerals in the name. So Fe2+ is called iron 2, and 3+ is iron 3. So we just state the charge in the name. Now only do this for transition metals, and this will clarify everything. So let's name this compound here. First of all, we've got to figure out it's iron something, right? I'm going to break it in two. Okay, now that thing on the back side has to be the anion. And if you look on your list, you will see that that is acetate. So I'm going to say this is iron, and I'm just going to leave parentheses because I've got to put the charge in there. And then the anion is acetate. That's this back end. Now the charge of acetate is -1, and I've got 2 of them. So the total charge of this whole thing is 0. So what do you think the charge had to be on the iron? It had to be a +2 because I have a +2, 2 -1s, that will add up to 0. So this is iron 2 acetate. The next guy, this anion is hydroxide. Hydroxide is OH-, and so the charge of that is -1, and there are 3 of them. So what do you think the charge of the iron was? What plus -3 will give you 0? It's a +3. So this one was iron +3. So the total charge of these compounds is 0, and that's going to help us figure out what was the charge of the transition metal. The last one, if I break that in half, oxide is an O2-, so the cation must have been a 2+, so we would name it iron 2, that's his name, oxide. Okay, remember, in parentheses, it's not how many, it's the charge of the transition metal. The next lesson, we're going to talk about writing these formulas, and we'll put these two things together, names and formulas, and you will be a pro at this.